Everyone. In this video, I'm going to record a little bit of a recap of electrostatics, and basically we will highlight some of the main results in electrostatics, and most of them will be useful for developing into electrodynamics or analyzing the equations of electrodynamics later on in the course. So basically I will take this opportunity to highlight some of the main results in electrostatics. So our starting point of the discussion here in this course, as we have seen, is basically the Maxwell's equations. Okay. So the Maxwell's equations are the starting point. Here I have written down the Maxwell's equations. And as you can see, one should think of the Maxwell's equations as equations which determine the electric and the magnetic field, which I have written on the left-hand side of this equation. And these electric and magnetic fields are sourced by charge densities and current densities. So I'm sure all of you have already seen these equations in your previous course on electrodynamics. And so this is going to be the starting point of our discussion in this course. Okay. So of course, as we can see from this equation, that the charge density and the current density sources the electric and magnetic fields. And basically we have to, given some charge density and current density, we plug it in here and we try to solve for these equations. And we try to get a consistent solution for this set of, coupled differential equations for the electric and magnetic fields. And of course, in turn, the electric and magnetic fields can exert a force on the charges themselves. And this force has the expression, this is called the Lorentz force. This has the expression of this form, that it is, I'm sure again, all of you are very familiar with this. So basically the force on a point charge Q due to an existing electric field E is just given by Q times E, while the magnetic force is a V cross B force. Okay. So this again, if you have an extended charge density, and if you consider, you want to calculate the force on an extended charge density, even then we can use this expression just by considering the force that is acting on individual elements of the charge density or current density. And by that we can know what is the total force on this whole configuration. We can consider the individual forces on the constituents of a configuration and add them up vectorically to know the total force on this configuration. Okay, that's how we do it. And as we'll see later on, that we can write down a force density corresponding to this equation using charge density and the current density here. So I will discuss that very soon. But so basically our starting point are these set of Maxwell's equations, the so-called Maxwell's equations, and the Lorentz force. Okay, these are the fundamental equations with which we are going to start our discussion. I must say that the way I have written this equations, I'll be working in SI units. So I've included this epsilon naught and mu naught here. And so these equations, as I have written down, are the so-called vacuum Maxwell's equations, or these are the Maxwell's equations which are valid in vacuum in the presence of any charge density or current density. Okay, so so that is going to be the starting point of our discussion here in this course. And later on, during the later half of the course, we will discuss the corresponding effective Maxwell's equations within matter. And that discussion we'll do in the later part of the course. So as far as most of our discussions in this course is concerned, we'll be worrying about the vacuum Maxwell's equations, and that's why I have considered a epsilon naught and a mu naught here. Okay, so given that this is our starting point, these equations are our starting point, there's one thing that I want to really emphasize about these equations, and that fact that perhaps again you are very much familiar with this, but The fact is that we are doing field theory here. The electric and the magnetic fields are functions of space and time, and we want to solve for these functions. These are vector functions of space and time, and we want to solve for these functions. And the equations that allows us to solve for these functions or know what these functions are, these equations are essentially local equations. Okay, so these equations are local equations in the sense that here on both sides of this equation, we will, when we write this equation down, what we mean is basically the divergence. For instance, this is the Gauss law. Divergence of E at some point x is given by the charge density at that point x divided by epsilon naught. Okay, so this is basically the derivative at a particular point x, and also this is given by the source which is at the same point x. Okay, so this is very important that here this is basically the same point about which the equations are valid. So this equation is valid point by point at every point in space-time. Okay, so similarly, if we look at the time-dependent equations, then there will be time, we can consider time dependence as well. So here, even in this equation, there can be time-dependent charge densities. So let me also make that explicit. So if I want to make that explicit, so I will write E as a function of space and time at a particular point in space and a particular instant in time. This is given by the charge density at that point in space, at the same point in space, and at the same time t, at which I'm interested in finding the electric field divided by the epsilon naught. Okay, so this is very important that these are local equations. It's very important that these are local equations, right? And the idea is that the concept of the field makes this idea of locality manifest, in the sense that if you have two charges, let's say, then let's say you have a charge which is plus q, and you have a charge which is minus q, and they are interacting via they have some forces. So basically what you would say is because of the existence of the charges, it creates electric field. Let's say because of the existence of this positive charge q, it will create an electric field which will be again determined by the fact that the positive charge q exists only at this point in space. Okay, this electric field is immediately determined by this set of equations, if you like. So now once you have this positive charge here which creates an electric field and which is determined by a local equation, then there is a negative charge here which interacts with the field locally and experiences a force by this Lorentz force law here. Okay, so basically interactions are always local. The fields are created locally, through the local equations, and the charges themselves experience a force due to the fields. That also happens locally. I mean, if there is no electric field here at the location of the negative charge, it will never experience any force. Okay, even if there are electric fields far away. Therefore, the interaction between this charge plus q and minus q is not like something like an action at a distance, but it happens via the electric and magnetic fields that these charges create, and that idea makes the concept of locality manifest in some sense. Okay, so that's so interactions are always local, and that wouldn't have been possible without the idea of the electric and magnetic fields. So the idea of the fields make the idea of locality possible. It makes it we can write down local equations and local interactions. Okay, so that is something which is also very important about these equations. But having emphasized this point, this point is the most important point here, which I have noted, that both on the left hand side as well as on the right hand side of the equation, the space-time points are the same. Please try to note this fact. Okay, very good. So with this, let me proceed on to the next topic, which is immediately after I have written down this equation, there is something that immediately follows from this equation as a consistency condition. Okay, so if I take the divergence on the last Maxwell's equation, this is also called Ampere's law, as we will see later. Okay, the reason for that. So you may be familiar with Ampere's law in a different form, but here we'll see that how this equation relates to that form. So if we take this equation and if we take a divergence on this equation, then what we get is what I have written here in this formula. Okay. So now if I take this divergence and if I so the first term here, as you know that the divergence of a curl that vanishes, you can prove this from using your epsilon ijk definition that we have discussed in the previous video, and you can show that this term is going to vanish. Okay, and then you will be left over with this other term where you will have a divergence of E. Again, the derivatives with respect to space and time are interchangeable. So basically, you can take the time derivative out and put the divergence inside. So you will get a time derivative of divergence of E and then a divergence of J here. Okay, J is the current density. And once you have that, then you can again use Gauss law or one of the other Maxwell's equation to write it in this form as divergence of E equal to rho by epsilon naught. And that, therefore, del del T of rho by epsilon naught is equal to the divergence of J with a sign. And that you can write compactly. Of course, the factors of epsilon naught and mu naught, these are constants, and therefore they drop out. And then you can write this equation down, which says that the time derivative of the charge density is equal to the divergence minus divergence of the current density. Okay, so what is this? This is a statement of conservation of charge. Okay, this is a statement of conservation of electric charge, and by this, you can try to understand this statement physically by performing an integral of this equation over some volume, let's say some d cube x. Okay, over some volume. If you integrate this equation, then you get this line here, because if you integrate this over a volume, then you can use divergence theorem to write this as a surface integral, and this integral over the volume would give you the integration of the charge density, and this is nothing but the total charge Q total, right? So this equation tells me that the time variation of the total charge in a region of volume V is nothing but the charges that has come in or left that volume V through the surface, through the surface of that volume. So if you have a volume here V, then any change in charge here must be compensated by a current that is either flowing in or flowing out of this surface that bounds the volume V. Okay, so this is a closed surface integral. Okay, so this is the idea, and it tells me that this volume can be as tiny as possible. It doesn't matter. You can select any small little bit of a volume. Even there, if there are charges plus minus, then the total number of charges inside this little volume would, if that changes, then it means that charges has either left or has come in, or they cannot be created or destroyed inside. That is the idea. And that is why it is called that this equation represents the idea of charge conservation. All right. So now basically this conservation of charge, this is a local form of the conservation of charge, and this is like the integrated form. But the local form of conservation of charge, this essentially is a consistency condition on the Maxwell's equation, because as you could see that we could just manipulate the Maxwell's equation and derive this conservation of charge statement. Okay, so whatever the source is, that means whatever the charge density or the current density is, it better satisfy this condition if it has to be an appropriate source for the Maxwell's equations. Okay, so that is like a consistency condition on the sources that follows from the Maxwell's equation itself. Very good. So now let us move on to the next idea. So basically here we have spoken about charge density. Again, charges can be like particles, like electrons, they have a charge, but you can take that and convert it into, you can take that particle, the particle picture, and convert it into the idea of a charge density. So this idea of a density is like a field. It's like, some charge existing at every point in space and time. Okay, so you can take the idea of a particle and convert it into this concept of a charge density by using the delta function. Okay, so if you have a particle, for instance, with charge E, let's say the electron, then you can simply say that the charge density of this electron is essentially like the charge times a delta function which clicks on the location of the electron. Of course, this R here, this R can be a function of time, and therefore this charge density itself can be a function of time. Okay, this R here can be a function of time. Right. So now if you take the charge density and if you integrate it over some volume, then you simply get the total charge enclosed within that volume, as we have seen. Okay. And then if you take this object and if you integrate, let's say, some electron is out here, if you take a volume around it and if you integrate this charge density, then of course you will get that the total charge here is that of the electron, because the delta function will only be non-zero at the location of the electron, and it will give you that the charge density is basically is non-zero at a single point, which is the point R, where the electron is located. Okay, so with the help of this delta function, we can essentially convert, let's say, a particle. When there is a charged particle, we can convert that into charge density by the use of this delta function. Okay, this I want you to note. And of course, this is a matter of convention that this is, of course, a three-dimensional delta function, but I'm not going to write down this superscript 3 here, denoting this is a three-dimensional delta function. It will be clear from its arguments that it is a three-dimensional delta function. Okay. So similarly, we can talk about the current density. As we know that if we have a current density and we integrate it over a surface, let's say, there is a surface like this. Okay, and there are some currents that are moving through this surface like this. So if I take this surface and if I integrate it, integrate the current density on this surface. So there's some J here. If I integrate this J over this whole surface, then what I get is basically the current, or the charge per unit time moving through this surface S. Okay, so I need to take the current density and integrate it over a surface to know what the total current passing through that surface is. Now, if we have a moving charge, then we can simply say that whatever the charge density is, if we have many moving charges constituting some charge density, then we can simply say our current is essentially the charge density times the velocity of the individual charges. Okay, we can simply say that this is our current density, and let's say for an electron, which is again moving around, then we can say that the charge of the electrons times the velocity of the electron times the delta function. So this current density would be non-zero only where the electron is located and it is moving. Okay, so times this delta function. So as you can see, this is of this form. E times the delta function is the rho, and V is basically dr dt. Okay, so basically this will give me the charge density corresponding to a moving electron. Okay, this is how to use the delta function and write down current densities and charge densities in this way. One can write down for a point particle, and thus in that process, convert the idea of a charged particle or a single charge moving into that of a current density or a charge density. Okay, using the delta function, we can do that. That's what I want to emphasize here. Okay, very good. So with this little bit of introductory discussions, let us move into the idea of electrostatics. So what is electrostatics? As you all know very well, these are time independent or static solutions to the Maxwell's equation. So the way I would like to approach this electrostatic problem is as follows. I would like to say that, of course, we need to solve these complicated set of Maxwell's equation that we had here. But in order to find, so of course, this has a very rich set of solutions. Almost everything we see around, which doesn't involve gravity, is essentially some complicated solution of this set of Maxwell's equations. Okay, so of course, there are other kinds of forces which are deep down inside the nucleus of an atom. but those hardly influence our everyday life. But most of the phenomena that we see around are essentially a complicated solution of this set of Maxwell's equations. So basically, this has a rich set of solutions, but we want to simplify our life initially and look at some very simple solutions, or rather the simplest set of solutions to this set of equations. And in order to do that, we make a simplifying ansatz. We say that let us look at certain kind of solutions which has these properties, and that is called making an ansatz for a solution. And once we make that ansatz, then we can look for these kind of simpler solutions to this Maxwell's equation. And therefore electrostatics is basically an ansatz where you set the magnetic field and the current density to 0. You say that nothing depends on time, so the electric field and the charge density, they also don't depend on time. Okay. So with this, if you plug this back into your Maxwell's equation, then you will see that two of the equations are already satisfied because B is 0 and J is 0. So they are already satisfied. Immediately they satisfy the ansatz. But there are two other equations that are left. One is this Gauss law. Okay, this is, that this is the Gauss law. This is left. Although, nothing depends on time now. The electric field or the charge density is independent of time. And also, in addition to that, Faraday's law implies, so this is the, this law also has a name. It's called Faraday's law. We'll again see this in slightly more detail later on. What this means, why this is related to the Faraday's law. But so for now, given this set of equations are solved. These two set of equations are solved, and we are left with these two equations, which is the Gauss law and the curl of E equal to 0. Equal to 0 because B is 0. Okay, it also doesn't have a time dependence. So minus del B del T, which you have typically written here, this term is simply 0. So you don't have to worry about that del B del T. So this means that the curl of E must be 0 everywhere locally, as well as the divergence of E must be given by this charge density. Now, so this is, these are the set of equations that will be used to determine the electric field given any charge density. That is the electrostatic problem. Given any time independent charge density, this is some distribution of charge, this is some distribution of charge. You want to know what is the value corresponding electric field due to that charge, and that is simply given by solving these two set of equations. Okay. But the main thing that is to be emphasized, that we need to solve for both these equations if this has to be a legitimate solution to the whole Maxwell's equations, right? Because Maxwell's equations, I wrote down some 4 equations, 2 scalar equations, 2 vector equations, and here 2 of them are already satisfied within the electrostatic ansatz, and then we have to solve 2 more to actually satisfy the Maxwell's equations completely. Again, this will be a simple set of solutions because we are not considering time dependence, neither are we considering the magnetic fields to be non-zero. So also we are setting the current density to 0. So these are very special solutions if it exists, but they are very simple solutions that need to be looked at initially. Very good. So let's see what happens for the point charge. Okay, so the charge density for the point charge, as I said, is given by the delta function, as I have written here, q times the delta function. Now you can do the following, you can play the following game, which you probably have, you have adopted this process before in your earlier studies of electrodynamics. I think you did this in school. So let's just recap that once. What you do is, you say that, look, let me take Gauss law and let me integrate Gauss law in a given volume V. Okay. Now, if I integrate Gauss law in a given volume V, this divergence of E becomes a surface integral over the closed surface which is bounding this volume, whereas the delta function clicks only on the location of the charge. Therefore, this becomes the charge, charge divided by epsilon naught. It clicks only on the location of the charge. Okay. So if we integrate Gauss law over a volume which encloses this point charge, then we simply get, the charge of, the total charge of the point charge, which is Q divided by epsilon naught. And that should be equal to the total electric flux moving out through the closed surface enclosing the volume. Very good. But now we play the following game. We see that because this is a point charge, the electric field must be symmetric if we rotate along these directions about the point charge. So there should be some kind of rotational symmetry about the point charge, and therefore the electric field can only depend, electric field as a function of this location r can only depend on the value of this can only be a function of r. And also the symmetry of the problem says that it should be along the radial direction only, which is I have written here. Okay, so the electric field should be everywhere, should be a function of r only, the distance from the location of the charge, where r is the distance from the location of the charge, and it should point radially outwards. Now, given the symmetry of the problem, we can draw spheres, centered about the point charge here. Okay, so if we draw a sphere centered about the point charge here and perform our integration over the volume of the sphere which we have drawn, then this electric field is integrated over the surface of the sphere that we have considered. This sphere is, by the way, called a Gaussian surface, on which you are trying to imagine the existence of this sphere to find out what is the value of the electric field and solve the Gauss's law problem. Okay, so now if we did that, then we will say that, well, if I plugged in this ansatz here, the surface also we always consider outward pointing normal. So E dot ds would essentially, they are in the same direction. Therefore, you have E of r ds, where r is the radius of this sphere. So this radius is r. Okay. So now, if you take this and because r is the radius of this sphere and E can depend only on r, therefore the value of this E of r is constant throughout this surface of radius small r, right? And because this is constant throughout the surface, therefore we can bring it outside the integral. So and then we are left with the integral over the surface, and the surface area of a sphere, as you know, is 4 pi r squared. So this is equal to ER 4 pi r squared. This should be equal to Q by epsilon naught. And this is true for all surfaces of radius r, and therefore you can conclude that E of r is basically Q by 4 pi epsilon naught r squared. This r square comes from this integration over the surface of a sphere, and that therefore gives you what is known as Coulomb's law. This you are familiar with, and this is how you have obtained Coulomb's law using this idea of the Gaussian surface, which highly exploits the symmetry of the problem. Because this problem has spherical symmetry, therefore you are able to use this idea that you can use these Gaussian surfaces to determine what the value of the electric field is. But if, for instance, this was some very crooked charge distribution like this, okay, some plus like that, then assuming spherical Gaussian surfaces would not have given you of course Gauss law would be true, but then assuming spherical if the charge distribution didn't have the spherical symmetry, then considering spherical Gaussian surfaces does not help in any way determining the electric field. Okay, Gauss law would still be valid, but it will not help you in determining the electric field everywhere. So you need to be careful to use Gauss law arguments or these Gaussian surface arguments. You should be very, very careful, because if there is no symmetry, then these arguments usually don't work. So you need to be very careful about that. All right, so very good. So but using this kind of sleek symmetry based argument, we were able to derive the electric field due to a point charge, and that is basically, as we know, is Coulomb's law. Well, when Coulomb's law is formulated as a force between two charges. Now, as you know, the Lorentz force due to a constant electric field is given by Q times the electric field. So from here, Coulomb's law simply follows. Very good. So now, but our job is not over yet, because we have essentially solved only one of the two Maxwell's equations that we are supposed to solve in electrostatics. Okay, the Gauss law we have solved by using this method of integration at every point, at every sphere of various radius r. Using that and exploiting the symmetry of the problem, we could solve Gauss law, and one can actually explicitly check that if we take this electric field and if we take the divergence of the electric field, then it is zero everywhere except at the origin, and at the origin, because this integration should be valid, it should be given by a delta function. Okay, so basically, therefore, this definitely satisfies Gauss law, but the question is whether it satisfies this curl of E equal to 0 equation or not. If it doesn't satisfy, then even if it satisfies Gauss law and doesn't satisfy this equation, it is not a solution of the electrostatic problem. So you have to go back and check now whether the curl of E equation, that is satisfied or not. So in order to do that, you have to take the curl of this. That means you have to find the curl of this vector r hat by r square, and I leave it up to you as an exercise to find out this curl and show that this vanishes. Okay, so this is this I am leaving to you as an exercise. Please go ahead, and again, you can use the definition of the curl in terms of the epsilon ijk, and then go ahead and show that this vanishes identically. Okay, so very good. Again, here by r hat, I mean it's the these differentiations are taken with respect to the components of the r vector. So this is like the derivative with respect to r, if you like. This is like derivative with respect to r. Okay, and then you can show that this vanishes. Very good. Also, as you can see that this is the this will tell you what the force would be between, let's say, two electrons. If you take the point charge to be an electron, you can plug in its charge here, and you can consider two electrons and compute the force between two electrons. Similarly, you can also compute the electron's mass, so you know what is the gravitational force between two electrons. And you might want to, actually compute the numbers. That means what is the gravitational force between two electrons and what is the electric force between two electrons, and take a ratio of this. Okay, if you take the ratio of this, then it will not depend on the distance, because both of them fall down as goes down as 1 over r square. So it will not depend on the distance. So this ratio will be a number, the electromagnetic force between two electrons and the gravitational force between two electrons. This is a number, and I encourage you to go ahead and compute this number, and you will see that how small the gravitational force is. This number is going to tell you. Okay, so please go ahead and plug in these numbers and try to find the ratio of the gravitational force versus the electromagnetic force, or like the electrostatic force between two electrons. Okay, this will be a fun exercise to do. Very good. So now this is the solution to the electrostatic problem for a point charge. But we want to do better. We want to not only solve for a point charge, but we want to solve the electrostatic problem for an arbitrary charge configuration. And how to do that? So in order to do that, I have to introduce a concept of it is convenient to introduce a concept of the electrostatic potential. Okay. So what is the electrostatic potential? You see, here we have to solve these two equations, right? Because we have to solve these two equations, one of the equations says curl of E equal to 0. Because it says curl of E equal to 0, therefore we should be able to write down E as the divergence of a scalar field phi. Okay, where phi is a scalar field now. Okay, and if we take the divergence of a scalar field, we get a vector field, and we declare that should be the form of E for the electrostatic problem, because any field whose divergence, whose curl vanishes, can be written down in this form. As you can see, if you take the curl of a divergence, it vanishes, and therefore any field whose curl vanishes can be written down in this form of the gradient of a scalar field. And I would like to think of this as, making an ansatz for the electric field and solving this equation once and for all and forgetting about it. Okay, so this is more like, solving one of the Maxwell's equation, that you had to solve. Once you write the electric field in terms of the scalar potential phi, so the scalar field is called the electrostatic scalar potential. And once you write the electric field in terms of the electrostatic scalar potential, then you have solved this equation which says curl of E equal to 0. And you don't have to worry about this you don't have to worry about this anymore, and you can forget about this completely. Now you have to see then what is the implication of Gauss law for this particular potential. Okay, so for that you have to essentially plug it in into Gauss law and see that will tell you that the potential or the electrostatic potential must satisfy this equation. And as many of you are familiar, this equation is nothing but the Poisson equation for the electrostatic scalar field. Okay, now given some specific boundary conditions or given a boundary value problem, either with Dirichlet or Neumann condition and some sources here, you should be able to solve this equation if you know how to solve Poisson's equation, right? And here I must say that you can ask that why have I put in a minus sign here. This minus sign is purely a convention, and you will see later on that this convention allows you to interpret this phi easily in terms of the electrostatic potential energy, and for that reason, for energy considerations, this sign is put as negative. But this is purely a convention. You could have just worked without this sign, and then you could solve the electrostatic problem completely. Everywhere you will just have a negative sign in the solution, and basically you will, again, it depends on the charge also. So charges can both be plus and minus. So this is more like a convention. There's no physics in this sign at all, apart from the fact that when we consider the energy, there we'll see that if we have this sign, then phi will have a natural interpretation in terms of potential energy. But at the moment, it is just a scalar field which solves this equation, and therefore it is called the electrostatic scalar potential. Very good. So now we have to solve this Poisson equation for the electrostatic scalar potential. Okay. Now, before we do that, before we go ahead and talk about a general charge density, any general charge density, let us solve the problem that we already solved once more. Let us go back to the point charge and try to see what will be the potential for this point charge. Okay, so for that we have to plug into this Poisson equation as a source. We have to plug in the delta function, and we need to find the potential when the source is a delta function. Okay, that is the problem which we need to solve. Now we will try to solve this problem in a slightly different way than we did before, and this different way is very instructive, because later on when we do slightly more complicated, we look at slightly more complicated scenarios, this other way of working with the equation will be very helpful. Okay, so here what I'm going to introduce here is basically the Green's function. So basically when you have to solve for this equation with the delta function source, then this is when you solve this equation, then this is called the Green's function of the Nabla square operator, and that is what we are going to find now. And then using that Green's function, it is easy to write down a solution for this general problem that we want to solve here for an arbitrary source. We can use the solution of this problem for a point charge to write down a general solution for this problem with an arbitrary source. Okay, we'll see how that works out. But for the moment, let us try to focus on this problem where we have a delta function as a source and we want to solve it. How to do that? Okay, so the way to do that would be to first do a Fourier transform on both the sides, or consider the Fourier transform, consider both the sides written in terms of the Fourier transforms. So phi, if I do a Fourier, in terms of its Fourier transform, can be written in this way. This we discussed initially when we are discussing or reviewing or recapping some of the mathematical formulas that we need here. So this is the statement of the Fourier transform of phi. So phi can be expressed in terms of phi tilde, which is a Fourier transform of phi, as a field over space. Phi tilde is basically its Fourier transform. And similarly, the delta function can also be written in terms of this, sines and cosines in this following way. So this we have discussed before. We have seen this before, and I'm using the same conventions as we have fixed here. So basically, with this convention, we can take this phi and plug it back in this equation. Once we do that, then we'll see that the Nabla square that acts on the phi, that can act on this exponential, because that is the only place where the x dependence lie. So we can take the Laplace square inside the integral because x and k are independent variables. I can just take it inside, and once I take this Laplacian operator inside, it can only act on this exponential function because everything else is a function of k. And once it acts on the exponential function, it will bring down two factors of ik dot ik, and once it brings that factor down, and we'll see that we can compare the coefficients of this e to the power ikx from both sides, and that will give us this equation. Okay, so this is what we have achieved by considering the Fourier transform. We have converted this partial differential equation that we had to solve into an algebraic equation, and we can simply solve for what is phi tilde, because we just divide both sides by k square. Then this is just phi tilde of k, which is the Fourier transform of phi. So now, because this is the Fourier transform of phi, therefore we can just Fourier transform back. We can say e to the power ikx 1 over k square, that is our basically phi, because our phi tilde by this definition was related to phi through this Fourier transform. So we know phi tilde from this algebraic equation, and we can immediately solve for the algebraic equation and know phi tilde is 1 over k square, and then we can plug this back into the integral for phi in terms of phi tilde, and therefore we just need to take the Fourier transform of 1 over k square, and that will be our phi for this problem. Okay, now we have to do this integral basically. Okay, so how to do this integral? So as far as this integral is concerned, these x's are parameters, and this integral is over the k space. So how to do that? So in order to do that, what we can do is basically in the k space choose our z axis. So in the k space, in general, there's some vector, let's say, which is x. Okay, now what we can do in k space is choose our z axis along this, this is like kz, we can choose it along the x vector. So let's say, we are working in k space, and there's some direction which is the x vector direction, and along this vector direction we can choose the kz axis, and then we can choose x and y orthogonal to this. But along the x vector direction we can choose our z axis. Okay, kx and ky we can choose orthogonal to that. But this is what we want to do. We want to choose our z axis along the x vector. So if we do that, then this dot product simply becomes k x cos theta for various k's in the k space, because theta is the angle that the various k's make with the z axis, and we are integrating over all possible k's. So basically this is an integration over all possible k's, and as you know, the volume element in spherical polar coordinates is written as k square sine theta d theta d phi dk. Okay, and there is a division by k square. So this k square from the numerator and denominator cancels, and the main thing that we get out of choosing the z direction as the direction of the kz direction as the direction of x, the main thing that we get is this thing becomes independent of phi. So the phi integral kind of factors out, and we can do it separately. So this gives us a factor of 2 pi, which is separate, and then we are left to do this particular integral, which is basically the integral over theta. Okay, we have to perform the integral over theta and k. Okay, these are the two integrals that we need to perform. Now, for performing the integral over theta, that is easy now, because we can write sine theta as d cos theta with the sign, and then we can simply integrate this, and we find that the function that we get eventually is basically 2 sine kx divided by kx. Note that here this is not a vector anymore. K is just the magnitude of the vector, which is to be again integrated upon. So we have to find the integral 0 to infinity dk, okay, sine kx by kx. Okay, this is the final integral over k that needs to be done. This integral over k was here, but now we integrated just the theta integral here in this way, and then we get this sine kx by kx, and that needs to be integrated over all of k to get this result. Okay, again we have to integrate from 0 to infinity, because we are in k space, we are using spherical polar coordinates, and the magnitude of k can only vary from 0 to infinity. Okay, it's not negative. So therefore now this integral needs to be done. Again, this integral involves, you can just do a variable transformation and bring the 1 over k outside here. You can just say that, kx is equal to some quantity, and that will, k tilde is basically kx. Right, so this will be a tilde. I'm missing a tilde here, I guess. Okay, so this will be a tilde. So basically this dk tilde sine k tilde by k tilde, this integral is given by pi by 2. Many of you might actually know this very well, but if you want, I have also worked it out here, and you can go through that integral in your spare time, how to do that integral. Let me not go through that integral in very great detail, because the main physics that we wanted has already been extracted. So this is essentially some number. This integral is essentially some number, and just during the variable change, we have noticed this 1 over x has come out, and basically therefore the potential will be 1 over x. Again, this x means the mod of x, right? So this x means mod of x. Okay, sorry, this x means the mod of x vector. Okay, and this has come out of the integral as soon as we did. Why this is mod? Because in the dot k dot x, we wrote this as kx cos theta, and here this x was essentially mod of x vector, and the k was essentially mod of k vector. So with this, finally we have our potential going down as the distance x. Okay, potential as a function of x, where we have chosen the charge to be located at the origin. That basically goes down as 1 over x. Okay, so this is in general, this is a vector, function of x1, x2, x3, but it can depend only in this combination of x, where this x, if you like, in terms of x1, x2, x3, is simply x1 square plus x2 square plus x3 square to the power half. Okay, so this is the result that we have. Again, if you want to know how this integral is found, then you are encouraged to go through the steps here. Okay, here I have worked out the steps, and you can see why this integral I comes out to be pi by 2. Okay, this result is something. If you have not done this integral before, I will highly encourage you to actually try it on your own before going through this before going through this like steps here. I would encourage you to try to do this on your own. You can do this using various advanced techniques as well, but I will encourage you to try to do this using everything that you know about integrals so far, very just by very mundane tricks one can actually find the result of this integral, and this we have used in finding the solution to the potential. Now once we know the potential, the electric field is very easy to find, because all we have to do is to take the gradient of this potential. Okay, so if we take the gradient of this potential, then we see that we have to take the gradient of this 1 over x, where again the gradient is with respect to x. So what do we mean by that? We mean that, again, so there's a minus sign, because in the definition there is a minus sign. Then 1 over x, because these are derivatives acting on 1 over x, therefore this gets converted to 1 over x square, and the derivative acting on x. Okay, and what this derivative acting on x means, I have written it out clearly. So this nabla is basically del x1. So this as you remember, this convention del 1 is basically del x1 and so on. Okay, so that is the convention that we have used here. So basically this is our nabla, okay, while taking the gradient, and then this is acting on this magnitude of x vector x1 square, x2 square, x3 square to the power half. And if we execute this process, we will see that this object here is essentially given by x vector by x, this thing. This is essentially the unit vector along the x direction, or this is the unit vector along the radial direction in the x space, if you like, or when we use the x coordinate. So this is a very important result, which it's useful to remember this result because it comes in again and again and again. So if you take the gradient of this mod of x, you get x hat. This is a result which can be very useful to remember. And as you can see, we have again for the point charge, we have again found the electric field due to a point charge, which we argued from Gauss law using symmetry arguments. We have again found that. But I would like to emphasize that in this process of finding the electric field, we have never used the fact that the electric field is symmetric. It just came out of the solutions. Okay, we just solved the Poisson equation with the delta function potential. We have solved the Poisson equation with the delta function source. And once we solved that potential from the scalar potential, we could find the electric field, and that gave us this exact form of the electric field. Okay, we didn't assume that the electric field was radially symmetric. It came out to be radially symmetric because of the delta function. All right. So this is something which is interesting. You don't need to assume it if you know how to do it most generally. Okay. So very good. So with this knowledge of the electric field due to a point charge, let us try to proceed and find the electric field due to a dipole. Now, what is a dipole? A dipole is essentially this charge configuration where there is a plus charge here and a minus charge here separated by some distance d. And let's say you are interested to find the potential at some point x which is far away, okay, from this configuration. Okay, I mean, it may not be far away, it can be at any point. Okay. So basically we have chosen this origin to be the location of the plus q charge, and with respect to this origin, the minus q charge would be located at minus d, in this axis, whatever this axis is. And then there's a vector pointing, this d vector pointing from the minus charge to the plus charge, and the location of the point where you are interested in finding the scalar potential, that is denoted by this x. Okay, that is the problem. Now, if that is the problem, then you can put write the problem down in terms of the Poisson equation, because now you will have two sources, one charge plus q located at delta x and another charge minus q located at x plus d vector, this vector, okay, this point. Okay, so now, this is x plus d vector because x is the point where you are trying to find the potential, and d is the, minus d is the location of the minus q charge. Okay, so because this is minus d is the location of the minus q charge, therefore you get a plus sign within the delta function. Very good. Now, once you have this problem, you can try to solve for it. And because this equation is a linear equation, you can just use the principle of superposition to know what the answer is, because you know the solution for the point charges individually, and you can write those solutions down and add them up. That is basically the idea of principle of superposition, and that will give you the solution to this new problem where you have both the charges. So this you can do, and you will find that phi is of this particular form, where there's a 1 over x and there's a 1 over x plus d. Okay, so now let us say that for some reason we are interested in finding this potential which is far away from this location of the two charges. That means this mod of x is much greater than this distance between the two charges, which is d. Now, in this so-called far region, we wish to find what this exact solution reduces to. You will see that this is a very instructive thing to do. Of course, we know the exact solution, so you might wonder why do you want to know, some approximate result far away, but you will see, that result is very instructive. So, we want to know how we can legitimately approximate this exact result far away from this charge configuration. What is the nature of the scalar field? We want to know that. So if we try to know that, then what we'll use here is this multivariable Taylor series expansion. So here basically d is small. Because d is small, therefore we can use this multivariable Taylor series expansion and expand this function out 1 over x plus d vector mod of that. If we expand it out, we get these three terms here. Okay, and basically, right. So here also I have evaluated this third term where there's a double derivative acting on 1 over x, that term I have explicitly evaluated, and some, these steps are also very instructive. It's very useful to, work this out once. So I will, encourage you to go through the steps once and see that you understand every step. One thing that comes in super handy is basically this result, that the gradient of x, is basically x hat. This thing comes in very, very useful in manipulations such as this. Okay, so this is the third term in the series. So basically, right here again, one of the steps here involved this equal to d dot d or d square. So again, that can be seen very easily from, if you write it out in terms of the ij, in terms of the indices. If you write the vectors out, it's very easy to see why this would reduce to this term. So that I have worked out here. Okay, so that you can see. Okay, just go through the steps once more carefully. So that would be the then you can write this this object, the three leading terms we have written. So there can be other terms as well, but if we take these three leading terms and plug it back into the expression for the potential, then we see that this first 1 over x term cancels from these two, from the first two terms. So remember, the potential had two terms in it. One was this 1 over x, and the other was this 1 over this thing. So if you are very, very far off, then this behaves as 1 over x as well, and these two terms cancel out. Okay, and therefore the first non-trivial result is basically the second term in this expansion, and that remains here, and that gives you this, so this is the, this is the way in which we have the expansion. Okay, so there are again, more and more terms which go with higher and higher powers of d, that is the main point. Here we have a single power of d, and here we have higher and higher powers of d as you move to higher and higher order terms. Okay, that just follows from the way in which we have done this multivariable Taylor series expansion. That this power dependence of d, kind of follows from that result. Okay, so now if I if I may right now, if I can, there's a limit that I can take on the so-called dipole configuration, and this is the so-called ideal dipole limit. Okay, in this limit, what you do is you take this distance between the 2 point charges to 0, while you make the charges very large, so that the distance times the charge, that object remains finite. Okay, so you make the charge large, take the distance to 0. This is a limiting procedure where the product of these two is finite. Okay, this is fixed. Okay, and this product is essentially called the dipole moment of the configuration. Okay, this P, which is charge Q times this D vector, this is known as the dipole moment of this configuration. So in terms of this vector P, therefore, if we notice this expression, this first term can be written down very nicely because this is d dot x. So I can write this as p dot x divided by 4 pi epsilon naught x square. Okay. So but this second term, as you can see, there are more powers of d here. So because d tends to 0, therefore all these terms, all these higher and higher order terms, there's just only one q, right? There's just one q, but d is small. So all these higher and higher order terms, they just vanish. But under this limit, only the leading term survives, and so this is called the ideal dipole, for which this leading term in this dipole term, in this term which goes as 1 over x squared, this term in the Taylor series expansion or in the multipole expansion, this kind of Taylor series expansion is also called the multipole expansion. So this we'll do this in more detail later, in more generality later. But this leading order term, because it survives, therefore, this becomes very simple in this limit, and this is called the ideal dipole limit. Therefore, okay, an ideal dipole is a dipole for which the potential takes this form, where you take a plus charge and a minus charge and bring the distance between them close to 0, while you take the charge to be large, keeping the product of the charge and the distance fixed. Okay, that's the ideal dipole limit, and in this ideal dipole limit, all these other terms, just vanishes, like exactly, and then you have this expression as the full expression for phi, so this is an exact result. If it is an ideal dipole, then this is an exact result. Although we have expanded it for, like, when the distance is non-zero, we can expand it, you're far away. So if we keep this term, then this is only true very, very far away. Okay, all these terms are there. But if we take the d tends to 0 limit, okay, in that, then all these terms drop out. And in this strict limit, then, this becomes like an exact solution because all these terms are 0 in the strict limit. Okay, so this is the phi, the potential due to a dipole. And because this is a potential due to a dipole, you can use the potential due to a dipole to compute the electric field due to a dipole, which I have done in the steps here. So remember, phi is a function of x, right? Because phi is a function of x, therefore we have to take the gradient with respect to x. And therefore, the gradient acts on this x hat divided by x square there. It is convenient to write it in the form x vector divided by x cube. Here I have multiplied both numerator and denominator by x and written it in this form. And once I have done that, then I can take the derivative and act on it. There will be action of the derivative in the denominator, which is this term. Because this is 1 over x cube, then this will become minus 3, 1 over x to the 4. The minus sign cancels this minus sign here. And then we'll be left over with the gradient of x. Again, we know that the gradient of x is x hat. So this is, we can simply write x hat here. Now, there will be another term where the gradient hits p dot x vector. So if it hits p dot x vector, because again, this simply gives the p vector because the derivative acts only on the x, once. So if I want to write this in the component notation and I want to work this out, this is the gradient of p dot x, let's say. Okay, let's say I am interested in the ith component of this. So if I am interested in the ith component of this, I'll write this is equal to this is equal to, right, this is equal to del I pj and sum over indices. So this is j, xj, and because the derivative acts on this, I will get a pj delta ij, and then this is going to be pi, which is nothing but this p vector. Okay, so therefore, right, so therefore, this is the manipulation that simply gives you that this is equal to the p vector. Okay, so yeah, let me just make this a little smaller. Right, sorry, this is more like a manipulation here, and let me try to circle it. Right. Okay, so this is the step. Now, once we have done that, we can proceed, and therefore, the first one is simple. So here I have just reorganized these terms in the following way. So basically, we conclude that for the ideal dipole, phi takes this form, whereas its electric field takes this particular form, which we can just find by taking a gradient on this scalar potential phi. Okay, the main thing to note here is basically this fall off. Okay, that's the main thing to note. Okay, here you see I have written it as x hats. So all the dependence on r is there in the denominator. Okay, there is no dependence on r in the this radial distance r. There is no dependence on that in the numerator. Okay, so here we see that the scalar potential due to ideal dipole goes as 1 over x square. Remember, the scalar potential due to a point charge went as phi, okay, point charge, that went as 1 over x. But this one goes as 1 over x square. So for the ideal dipole, it goes as 1 over x square, whereas the electric field goes as 1 over x cube, whereas as we saw in the Coulomb's law for a point charge, it goes as 1 over x square. Okay, so this as if goes down faster than a point charge for the ideal dipole, and it just goes as 1 power more than that of a point charge, and this is something which is to be kept in mind. This is a very important point. Okay, very good. Now we have solved 2 examples using the scalar potential, and now therefore we want to solve the electrostatic problem in its most generality. Okay, now we want to solve the electrostatic problem in the most general way possible. Okay, so let's see, for any given charge density, we want to know what is the scalar potential, and if we know what the scalar potential is, then we know what is the electric field. Okay, so because the electric field is given in terms of the scalar potential as minus grad phi. So now therefore we also happen to know something. We know a special solution to this problem. If we take the charge density to be that of a point charge, that means it is some delta function, then we know the solution to that problem, and that solution is given here. So this function I have denoted it by psi, which is the potential due to a point charge. Okay, earlier I was calling this phi, but now I need to distinguish between these 2 problems. One is the general problem, which is this, which I am denoting as phi. The general problem is the Poisson equation with an arbitrary source, and the other is this special problem where again it's the Poisson equation but with a delta function source, and the solution to this I am calling phi, and the solution to this equation I am calling psi. And we know what the solution to this equation is, and that is given by 1 over this distance from the point charge. Okay, so the one thing that I want to now assume about this charge density, this can be very general charge density, whatever you like, but it is only limited in a limited region of space. Okay, it is restricted to a limited region of space. Because it is limited to a limited region of space, we'll see that certain things simplify, and so these are called localized charge densities, and this is more or less the kind of thing that we'll be dealing with mostly. So some kind of localized, something is happening somewhere locally, and we by locally I don't mean like a single point. It can be in a big region, but it doesn't extend all the way up to infinity. Okay, so in the problem that we are interested in, it can be an extended big region of charge density, and we want to find the potential due to that, and subsequently the electric field due to that. But all we assume is it is localized in space, that means it doesn't extend out to infinity. Okay, that we assume. Okay, so now if we assume that, then with these 2 inputs that we want a solution to this equation, and we already know a solution to this other equation where the source is a delta function source. With these 2 inputs, we can solve for phi. How? This is called the power of knowing the Green's function and using the Green's function to solve the problem. So we can start with this identity. Okay, this is called the Green's identity, if you like. Okay, so you can start with this identity which says that phi nabla square psi nabla square phi equal to the a divergence of phi gradient psi gradient phi. Okay, this is the identity, as you can see, because you can act with this divergence throughout. You will see that the 2 terms will cancel, and then the 2 leftover terms will be identical to these 2 terms. Okay, so this is an identity. Okay, now because this is an identity, we can take this identity and integrate it over any volume. Now we choose to integrate it over a volume which contains the charge distribution. Okay, that means on the volume here, the charge distribution is 0 because this volume is large on the surface of the volume here. Okay, again this del V is a notation for the boundary of V. So this is some surface. Okay, you can think of this surface as a surface at infinity. Okay, you can think of this surface as sphere at infinity. Okay, that can be our surface as well. So this is like an integration of these functions throughout space. Okay, so you can do that. Now if you do that, then if you take this integral and if you try to integrate this, then by divergence theorem, I haven't applied divergence theorem yet. So this, hang on, so this thing is still an integral over the volume V. Now if I apply divergence theorem, if I apply divergence theorem, right. So let me write this a little properly. So if I apply divergence theorem on this term, this will be a surface integral del V of phi, this thing psi minus psi nabla phi dot the surface. Okay, and if this surface is really the sphere at infinity, where there is no charge at infinity, so we can take the boundary condition which tells us that this potential vanishes at infinity. Okay, so if the potentials vanish at infinity, which is a legitimate thing to consider, of course this psi vanishes at infinity, that's very true, this psi vanishes at infinity, but if the charge density is localized, then we can also choose our boundary condition that phi vanishes at infinity, and because this is an integral only over the sphere at infinity, therefore this term vanishes because it multiplies by phi, and this term vanishes because it's multiplied by psi, so this whole thing just is 0. Okay, so basically this is equal to 0. If this is equal to 0, then I can move this expression on this side of the integral, and then plug in the terms. You see here we have phi, which is an unknown function, and so this unknown function we have multiplied by nabla square psi, but because nabla square psi satisfies this equation here, it's a delta function, therefore we have plugged in the delta function here, because nabla square psi is the delta function. Okay, now here in this other term, we know what is psi, it's a solution to this problem, so psi is here, written here, and nabla square phi also we know it is the source, okay, any source, any localized source, so that is equal to minus rho by epsilon naught. Okay, so these two terms here give rise to these two expressions, and there is an integral over it. So now as you can see, the delta function clicks only at the point r. This gives me phi at r. Phi at r is given by this integral of the source, where you have divided by this Green's function, like we have multiplied by this Green function divided by this Green's function is 1 over x, this mod of the distance. So basically you have multiplied with the Green's function and therefore multiplied with the solution for the point charge. Okay, that just comes in here through this term. Okay, so therefore you have solved for phi, which was the initial problem that you wanted to solve, the Poisson equation for an arbitrary localized source, and that you have done, that is given by this integral. Okay, now you can say that why was all this necessary, this was like too much, because you already know this result. This is just a statement of the superposition of charge. So if you take the charge density, which is composed of many tiny charges, then you can just say that the phi due to all these tiny point charges are essentially an integral of the whole thing. You calculate the phi due to all these tiny point charges and you sum them up, and the sum in the continuum limit becomes an integral, and you get this result. But again, this is a very compact way of finding this result. You could have also used superposition, just argued that this result should be valid by using the principle of superposition. That is also a correct thing to do. Okay, and that is perhaps how textbooks do it. The textbooks that you have seen, they do it in this way. But this is a very interesting and important method. One can also use this Green's function to solve a variety of boundary value problems. Okay, and but the boundary value problems is not in your syllabus for this course. You have already done it before. Again, if there is interest, I can give you one additional lecture on how to use this Green's function to solve boundary value problems, and there you will see the utility of this particular method of using the Green's function. Okay, I'll do that. Do it in maybe in a second video, or in a later video, if there is interest about that. But again, boundary values is not a part of our syllabus, so we are not worrying about it. But this technique of Green's function is going to be super useful in what is coming up for you later on in the course. Okay, so that is going to be important. And now if we are convinced that this is the solution of the full problem for an arbitrary source, then we can start playing the kind of game that we played for the dipole, and we can ask that, let's say there is some localized charge density here, and x points to, you know, any point on the charge density, and r is a point which is outside the charge density, you know. So this r is some point outside the localized charge density. In that case, I want to, if this point r is far away from this charge density, I want to know how this result for the potential behaves. Okay, so in the far region again, which is denoted when, you know, this r vector is very far away from this localized charge density. In that far away region, what happens? We can again play the same game. We can do the Taylor series expansion. Again, you know, we have this, nabla, 1 over r, right? So basically, we can just do this expansion here. And so again, I have kept up to the third term, like we did for before. So this Taylor series expansion we have done before, except that we had a plus sign here with the d. So it's very similar steps. You can just look back at the previous steps, and these are the various steps that leads to this final result here, where I have written down 3 terms. And one can just take these 3 terms out, this expansion, and just plug it back in here into the exact result for this thing, and that will be an expansion for large r, right? In the faraway region, we can expand this result by writing it down into these 3 terms plus higher order terms. Okay. So if we do this, then we'll see that our phi is given by, you know, these 3 initial terms, and then again, you know, plus, you know, there are higher order terms. The first term essentially, you know, because the first term is 1 over r, you can just pull it out of the integral, and it becomes the integral of rho, which is nothing but the total charge. Okay, that's the total charge. In the second term, you have x dot r hat divided by r square. So r hat divided by r square you can pull outside the integral, and you can define this quantity p, which is x times the charge density integrated over volume, and this is known as the dipole moment of the charge distribution. Okay, so you know, I have written it down in this way. So this is known as the dipole moment of this charge distribution. And so if you now try to write this third term, you can write it in this following. After you plug it into potential, you know, it takes this following form. But you can define a quantity like this in terms of xi, xj, you know, delta ij. Okay, and if we take this qij and dot it with ri, rj and divide it by r to the power 5, okay, then we get back this term here, because as you can see that, you know, if I multiply with ri, rj, this delta function will give me a r square here, and this the other ri, rj, you know, dotted with this would give me a x dot r, but that has to be a x dot r whole square. I'm missing a whole square here. Sorry. Let me correct this. So there is a whole square here, so which I'm missing, a whole square, and there's also a whole square here, which I'm missing, right? So that whole square will come in here. Okay, so sorry about this this mistake. Yeah, so here, as you can see in this step, there's one x dot r, so that is like a x dot r whole square that is going to remain here, and that x dot r hat whole square you are going to get if you just took this result and multiplied with it. Okay, very good. So this is the so-called multipole expansion, where the leading term goes as 1 over r, that is the total charge. Then there is a subleading term, which is the dipole term, which is p is the dipole moment defined in this way, and that is given by p dot r hat divided by r square. And the third term is basically the term which is called the quadruple moment, and this is given by the this contributes to the potential as ri, rj, you know, this term. Okay, again, if you see, you know, these are the, you know, these various moments of a distribution, of this charge distribution, they have the form like, you know, x, you know, rho x to the power n is the nth moment of the distribution, where if n is 0 you have total charge, if n is 1 then you have the dipole moment, n is 2 you have the quadruple moment. So in general this has the form as rho x to x, you know, xi, xj, xk, you know, that form. Okay, integral of that. So this characterizes distribution, in most cases, like more or less, if you know all the dipole, or if you know all the multipoles, then you have a very good idea about the potential. In fact, with some assumptions, with some additional assumptions, you can say that knowing all the multiple moments fixes the potential, fixes the this thing, the charge distribution uniquely. But there are some examples where it may not be uniquely fixed. Okay, there are also some examples where it may not be uniquely fixed. So, essentially, as far as the exterior phi is concerned, if we know all the, so by exterior I mean, so if I want to know the value of phi beyond this point, okay, where the charge density exists, if I want to know the potential, and I know, let's say, all the multiple moments of this charge density, then I can know the potential uniquely, given that I know what the multiple expansion is. Of course, this expansion is going to break down when I reach points which touch this charge density. So there's going to be a radius of convergence of this expansion. It's going to be valid for large R, but it's going to fail when R becomes this radius, which is the typical radius up to which this charge density is extended. Okay, so that is the radius of convergence of this multiple expansion. Okay, so again, this is a curious exercise which I leave for you, that if total Q is 0, then you can show that this dipole moment P is independent of the origin, and so on. Okay, this will also be independent of the origin Qij if this both the dipole moment and the quadrupole moment vanishes. Now, you can ask that why the names, dipoles and quadrupole. Dipole you can imagine, because, you can have this ideal dipole where Q is, Q is basically 0, and also these higher moments are 0. That is obtained by taking a plus Q and a minus Q charge. That means two poles, and bringing them close together, taking the charge large. Okay, we have seen that ideal dipole case before. So that is why, this is called a dipole, because there are refers to these two charges, plus and minus. Okay, so similarly you can play a game with respect to quadrupole moment, where you can take a plus Q and a minus Q and a minus Q and a plus Q, I think. Okay, here you will see that the dipole moments all vanish, the total charge vanish, because this is plus Q, so plus minus minus plus, a configuration like that. But this is going to have a non-zero quadrupole moment, as you can calculate and find. And this basically the first configuration that involves, must involve 4 charges so as to give you a non-zero quadrupole moment. Then perhaps because of this reason, this is called a quadrupole. Like, quadra, that 4 refers to this 4 charges, the configuration for which all this total charge in the dipole moment would vanish, but this, quadrupole moment will not vanish. This third term of the potential will not vanish. Okay, so similarly, I have given you some exercises in your problem sheet. You can try to, take any charge distribution and integrate it over some given volume to know what the total charge or the dipole moment or the quadrupole moment of the charge distribution. I've given you some enough exercises in your problem set. You can just do that or go through that and familiarize yourself with these ideas. If you haven't done this before, okay, but I'm sure that many of you have already done these things before. So basically, therefore, I'm going through it very quickly. Very good. So now there is something called an exterior, multiple expansion. The kind of thing that we did right now is called the exterior multiple expansion. It is basically telling us what the potential is in the far region, in the far away region. Similarly, there is also something called the interior multiple expansion, which I'll explain to you right now, and I'll contrast this with the exterior multiple expansion that we worked out right now. Okay, so here in the exterior multiple expansion, this is what we saw. There's a total charge term, there's a dipole term, there's a quadrupole term, and in general it has this form. Okay, by the way, you have to be careful about this factor of half. Where this factor of half came. So this factor of half is there. It comes from this Taylor series expansion, essentially. Okay, so when you do the Taylor series expansion, just going back a little bit, so when you do the Taylor series expansion, you get this factor of half in the second term. This factor of half kind of remains in the expressions, and if you don't include it in the definition of the quadrupole moment, which some books tend to do. But if you don't include it, then you have to keep the half here and worry about that factor of half. Okay. So basically, here this n factorial is basically that term which comes from the Taylor series expansion. And so in general, the multiple expansion has this form. You have various powers of r multiplying it, and you divide it by r to the power 2n plus 1, and this is the nth term, and this is called the nth multiple moment of this expansion, and this is the exterior multiple moment, where you are looking at, let's say there's some charge distribution and you're looking at far away. Okay, this is r, which is far away. Okay, so far away, in the far away region, this is the exterior multiple expansion. Okay, here I have explained it with the figure. So let's say there is some charge distribution which is there in this green region, and you want to find what is the potential far away. Okay, so in this region far away, the exterior multiple expansion that we just discussed is valid, and the radius of convergence of this multiple expansion is basically this radius r2. Okay, now it can also be true that there is an inner region which is empty. Okay, there is an inner region which is empty, and there is a radius, like there's a region inside the radius, let's say r1, a sphere of radius r1. There's a region inside the sphere of radius r1 where there is no charge. Okay, and this we refer to as the near region. Okay, or the inside region, whatever you like. It's an inside region is a better word. Okay, so the radius of convergence for the exterior multiple expansion comes, and it kind of stops here at r2, and in the inside region you can choose the origin to be inside here at this point here. And so in the inside region also we can expand the potential out. We know the exact answer. So we can expand the potential out even in the inside region. And that is called the interior multiple expansion. And it is valid in the near region or in the inside region. Okay, I will just maybe, write this as the inside region also. Right. So this is the inside region. Right. Very good. Okay, so in this case, in the inside region also we can perform an expansion of this potential. So what are we going to do? We are going to say that in the inside region, this x hat, this vector, which is basically the location of this charge density, that is, outside our region of interest. So this is an expansion where our r would be not in the faraway region, but somewhere here. This will be the r vector. Okay, so this, let me draw it with a different color maybe. Okay, so this is going to be the r vector somewhere here. Okay, for the interior multiple expansion, the r is somewhere inside and the x is somewhere outside. So basically here, therefore mod of x is basically greater than mod of r. Okay, so that's the inner region. Okay, so so in the inner region, sorry. Okay, so this is the thing in the inner region. Now again we can do a Taylor series expansion, but we need to here what is r is small, so this Taylor series expansion will be slightly different from the one that we had before. So here we have to use r as the small variable and expand it in this way. I've just kept the first two terms just to show you how it looks like. So the first term will go as, of course, where r equal to 0. Okay, that's the origin, if you like. Okay, at r equal to 0, this will go as 1 over x, and this expansion will go as 1 over x, and at higher there can be higher powers as you move away from the origin, but again this will be proportional to r. Okay, r square, etc., etc. Okay, and so using this back into the expression for phi, we'll have the leading order term which is 1 over x, and then there is subleading terms like this. And then we can define, this beta 1, this is like, charge density divided by x, and beta 2 is charge density divided by x square, and so on. Okay, we can go ahead. And these are the so-called interior Cartesian, in Cartesian coordinates, these are the interior multiple moments. And essentially, they are going to remain there. And they can be contrasted with the exterior multiple moments in the sense that here we are dividing by x, while in the exterior multiple moments, we are multiplying by factors of x. Here we are dividing by factors of x. Both in some sense capture the, essentially, these multiple moments capture the departure from sphericalness. Okay, so if it is like a perfectly spherically symmetric thing, then of course, x times this charge density, that is going to vanish by rotational invariance, right? Okay, so these various powers of R in the exterior multiple expansion, so these various powers of x in the exterior multiple expansion, they capture these these Tijs, these Ti's, I1, I2, these things. They have the form, these Ti's have the form that it's basically charge density, integrated charge density x to the power n, right? So these therefore capture the departure from sphericity. By x to the power n, I mean xi, xj, and so on, rho integral of that. This is basically these Ti's, right? So this is, these I, j, k indices are these indices, right? So of course, there's an additional thing of taking the trace out, but essentially this is what it is. Okay. So therefore, these objects capture the departure from sphericity for the charge distribution, and so does these interior multiple moments. Okay, these are also have various powers of x's, but they appear in the denominator because now x is in the outside the region of interest. So they lie in the denominator, and then you have a expansion in powers of R for this potential. Okay, these are the interior multiple moments. Okay, so that kind of brings me to a conclusion of this discussion on multiple moments. And again, you have to do a lot of exercise to kind of familiarize yourself and calculate the dipole moments and the quadrupole moments of various charge configurations. I'll give you some in your problem sheet, but you're encouraged to find more examples and do more problems where you have to calculate dipole moment and quadrupole moment. Okay, so with that, let me move on to the last topic in electrostatics, and that is got to do with the electrostatic energy. Okay, so let's talk about energy now. So if we want to talk about energy, then basically first let us see that what is the work done in bringing a single charge particle from infinity to a location point R in the presence of an external electric field. Okay, so in the presence of an external electric field, as we bring a charge in from infinity, it is going to experience a force, and therefore we have to overcome that force. Or so that force, so basically we have to do work against it, and that work done is given by the work done on the system is given by minus, because it's done on the system, from minus infinity to plus infinity, and line integral of this force, that is the work done, right? So basically this force, because this is some external electric field, let's say that electric field is given by some gradient of some potential, and that because the E, so this expression here, just to write down the step in between, so this expression here, F is basically Q times E, and this is nothing but minus Q times grad phi. Okay, that's the step, and if we take that step, right. So if we take those two steps here, then we are reduced to this expression. But now, as you can see, that this is a line integral from infinity to R. Therefore, and this is a total derivative. It's the gradient of phi. Therefore, it takes contributions from the edges. And if we say that our electric field, external electric field, is such that, okay, if phi goes to 0 at R tends to infinity, okay, mod R tends to infinity. So that if we assume, then this term from this lower limit vanishes, whereas only the upper limit contributes. So Q times phi is basically the potential of the it is basically the Q times phi is basically the work done in bringing a charge Q from infinity to a point r in the presence of some electric field whose potential is phi of r. Okay, so you can see that this sign in the definition of phi was kept so that we have a plus sign here, because if we had a minus sign in the definition here for the electric field, if we had a minus sign here, then we would have gotten a minus sign in this work done formula. Okay, so this is this thing. So now the energy, we'll say that the energy in a charge configuration is basically the work done in putting together the charge configuration. So, bringing the constituents of the charge configuration one by one from infinity, and, the total work done to put together this charge configuration and hence form its electric field. This total work done to do that, that we'll say is the energy in a charge configuration. Okay, that's the electrostatic energy in a charge configuration, because we are considering that the charges are not moving around, there is no magnetic field. Okay, but we have to do some work to bring in the charges from infinity to that point and put them together one by one, and that amount of work is basically stored in the electric fields as its electrostatic energy. Okay, so that energy, if we want to compute now, we can do the following. Let's say we have this charge configuration which we have here. This is some charge configuration which we have here, and there are various charges q1, q2, q3, q4, q5, etc. And we can try to find out the total work done in accumulating this charge configuration. So let's say we talk about the q1 charge. Okay, so if we talk about the q1 charge, it has been brought in the presence of no other charges. Okay, so therefore the work done to do that is 0. But now if we talk about the q2 charge, it has been brought in the presence of the q1 charge. So it's basically q1 times the potential at the location of q2. Okay, so the location of q1 is r1 and the location of q2 is r2. So basically it's given by, that work done is given by phi times q, where q2 is brought from infinity to this point r2. Therefore it's basically the potential due to the q1. So that's basically potential due to the q1 at R2 times q2, that is exactly this formula. Okay, so that is the work done in bringing the charge q2 in the presence of charge q1. So similarly, if we bring in q3 now, so this is the work done in the presence of q1 and this is the work done in the presence of q2, because the potentials add, therefore you can just add it and multiply it with q3. Okay, the potentials just add due to q1 and q2. So we have found the potentials which are added due to q1 and q2 and multiplied. Okay, R3 is the location of the charge q3. Okay, so this is the expression and so on. We are accumulating all the charges one by one. So if we want to write this compactly, we'll say that we are bringing the charges one by one. So I is less than j, and qi, qj, ri minus rj. So this is the potential, okay, which we have multiplied with. So this is sum over all I and j, in bringing in all the particles from infinity to this point. Okay, so this is just a compact way to write down this sum where we considered the work done to bring in every particle from infinity to a particular point on the charge configuration. Okay, very good. Very good. So now, because here, as you can see, there is a, I going to j exchange symmetry. Okay, so you could have done it in the reverse order also. Okay, so therefore, you can convert this integral, you convert this sum, this I less than j sum, into a sum where both you do a sum over I and j, but you include a factor of half. Okay, so you can just add this plus this and interchange I and j in the second term and then include a factor of half, and therefore it becomes an unconstrained sum. But then very importantly, j should not be equal to I, and this guarantees that you are not counting the work done by the charge on itself. Okay, so this counts, I not equal to j, this fact will take care of the fact that you are not counting the work done due to a single charge on itself while bringing it from infinity to that point. Okay, so this is just a generalization of general way to write this sum, and there is no difference between this and this, because as long as we say I not equal to j, this is just equal to this, and this factor of half is there to ensure that the overcounting is compensated for. Okay, so now using the expression for the potential, we can simply write this is qi phi I at ri due to all other charges and sum over I. Okay, with a factor of half. Okay, so this again if we want to write down phi Ri at Ri is basically due to all other charges other than I, so J not equal to I, all other charges other than I, we just take their potential and sum over, and we can write this expression. Now, so if this is the statement about the electrostatic energy, then we can try to write down a continuum version of this by converting this sum into an integral. So let us write this as an integral where this charge becomes charge density and this phi is the potential at that particular point due to this charge configuration, actually. Okay, due to this charge configuration, what is the potential at a particular point? And then, then you basically multiply it by charge density and you integrate it. Okay, this is the total, total energy in a configuration due to the, this is the energy in the configuration and it's a continuum version. But, the main thing to be noted is in going from this step into this step, we have just forgot about this J not equal to I, and therefore this expression written in this form, in going to the continuum version, also contains the self energy of the of the charges. So it also counts the amount of work done in bringing, let's say if there's a single charge you have brought in from infinity to that point, then you are here you are doing a continuum version of that, and you are as such also considering that single charge to be constituted of some infinitesimal components, and you're bringing that down from infinity. Okay, so this kind of also has the information about the electrostatic energy about a single charge. For a single charge, this also has the self energy is also present in this expression, and this I not equal to J or J not equal to I, this thing is kind of forgotten when we move to the continuum limit starting from this expression. Okay, now this is kind of quite an important point. Now with that we can do the following algebraic manipulation. We can write the rho or the charge density in terms of the electric field due to the same charge configuration, so that we can write as using Gauss law, we can write this as the divergence of the electric field. And so if we then we have the divergence of the electric field multiplied by this phi, and now this we can write as a total derivative, divergence of this total, phi times E minus E times the gradient of phi, because if you expand this out, then you will have two terms. One term will be E dot gradient of phi, which is going to cancel with this term, and the other term is going to give you this term back. Okay, this is a step like doing integration by parts. Okay, so now again, if the electric fields vanish at the boundary, this is the divergence of a quantity. So by divergence theorem, this will be a boundary integral, and if you consider the boundary to be a surface far away, okay, let's say the sphere at infinity, then this integral is going to vanish if the electric fields vanish there. So this is going to go to 0. You don't have to worry about this. You're going to be left over with this term, which is here, minus grad phi is nothing but the electric field. So the electrostatic energy in a charge configuration can be expressed entirely in terms of the electric field of the charge configuration. It's essentially the integral of E square. That is the electrostatic energy in a charge configuration. Okay, so this is very interesting, because although you have taken the charges one by one and you found out the energy stored in the configuration as the work done to construct this configuration, charge configuration, then it can be finally, once you have constructed the charge configuration, it has its electric field. So you can just look at the electric field and try to write down what is the total electrostatic energy by integrating E square over the whole space volume. Okay, so this gives you the electrostatic energy. Okay, so this is an expression for electrostatic energy, and again, just to emphasize this point once more, this expression for electrostatic energy uses this continuum version of the electrostatic energy where the self energy is contained. Okay, so if you take for instance a point charge, then you know that the electric field of a point charge is non-zero. If you integrate that, then you are going to get something non-zero here, because therefore the self energy of the point charge is also included in this expression where you write the electrostatic energy as an integral over the electric field square. Very good. But again, another interesting aspect of this is the fact that just like particles that we are familiar with, they have energy. Like we say the particle can have kinetic energy, potential energy, etc. The fields are also dynamical variables. They can also have energy. So this is the first thing that we are seeing, where the electric field also has energy and they are dynamical variables. Later on we'll see that the fields can have energy and momentum just like the particles themselves. Okay, this will be a discussion which will come down later on. But here we are already seeing that this electric field has energy, and this is very much behaving similar to what, let's say, a particle would behave. So even the field configuration, which is the dynamical variable here, the fields, electric and magnetic fields, they can have energy. Okay, this is one of the lessons that we are drawing for this. Okay, so now it's time for one fun application of this electrostatic energy. So if you, for instance, the thing that I was saying, if you consider the electron, and if you say that the electron has some radius a, okay, then what is the electrostatic energy of the electron? Okay, it's just standing still with some radius a. Okay, so I'm saying that it has a radius a because you see, if I take the electric field due to an electron and if we try to integrate this, then it will be this integration. Let's say this is the this integration is over whole space. Okay, so then I have to integrate the theta and phi from this 0 to 2 pi, and theta from 0 to pi, and then this r from 0 to infinity. So if I want to do this integral, then this is electric field squared. So there will be a 1 over r to the power 4 here, due to this square, and this will cancel out this with this r square and give you a 1 over r to the power square. Okay, so basically, if you are naive and say that the electron is a point particle really with zero radius, then this lower limit has to be set to 0 and you will get a divergent answer. Okay, so the energy will diverge, the self energy of the electron will diverge. But typically what would happen is, if you go to small length scales, there will be a length scale after which this physics that we are discussing, this classical physics of electrodynamics, that would not be valid perhaps, and it will be it will be given, firstly it will become a quantum theory, and then perhaps even that quantum theory would have a similar problem, and then perhaps at a very small length scale, which is given by this a, the electron is not a point particle, but maybe it's something like, it could be a vibrating string, or it could be something else. Okay, or it could be a distribution, not a point particle but a charge distribution of a finite radius, for instance. Okay, it could be anything, we don't know. But until today, the experiments that we have performed so far tells us that the electron is a point particle. So with the apparatus that is available to us today, we can look up to a certain length scale, certain small length scale, right? And up to that small length scale, we have ensured that the electron is a point particle and there is no structure to it. It's not anything else. Okay, but who knows, if we look closer and go to smaller and smaller length scales, of course, there is a possibility that the electron can start showing structures then, and therefore this A is basically, you can take it to be the experimental bound up to which the electron has been found to be the point charge. And this you can call as the radius of the electron. Okay, so if this is the radius of the electron, then you integrate the electric field only up to this point A. Also, you can perhaps do a model of the electron where it's a charge distribution plus plus plus, uniform charge distribution, so that this total charge is Q. And with that also you can find the electric field. Okay, with that also this will give you a finite answer. Okay, this is going to give you a finite answer. So basically, you somehow need to, remove this divergence at this, coming from setting the electric field, like setting this radius to 0. If you want to remove this divergence by essentially regulating this divergence by putting in this A, then you get some finite answer for the electrostatic energy for the electron. Okay. Now, when the this is again a very fun thing, and you should perhaps take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt. So it is just some classical analysis which perhaps is not very meaningful for the electron, and we have to do like something like quantum field theory for the electron and the quantum electrodynamics for the electrodynamics of the electron, etc., etc. But just to say classically, if I say that there's this the electron is like a little bit of a charge with some radius a, and the electric fields only exist outside this radius a. So then our electrostatic energy is given by this expression once you perform this integral. Then once this expression we have found, we can say that where does this energy come from? Let's say we are looking at a process which creates an electron. Okay, if you're looking at a process that creates an electron, the electron has some mass me, right? And it has some non-zero mass. So if you remember Einstein's famous E equal to mc square formula, then at least mec squared, this amount of energy needs to be put in to create an electron. But when you create an electron, you not only create the electron with its mass, you also create the electric field, right? So the whole electrostatic energy of the electron must be less than the total amount of energy needed to create the electron, which is mec squared. And if you use this fact, then you tend to get a bound on your electron radius, which is this a. And this is like a very rough estimate of this electron radius. You can put in the numbers here and try to estimate what this value of this a is, and perhaps compare it with the Compton wavelength of the electron, if you know what that is. Okay, but again, this is like a fun thing, so don't take this very seriously. But you understand the idea, right? When an electron is created, you basically expend mc square amount of energy to create the electron. And when it is created, you also create its electric fields. So in the electrostatic fields of the electron, the amount of energy that is there can be obtained by integrating E square of that electrostatic field, and that is given by this value. So this value better be less than the total amount of energy needed to create the electron, which is mec square. And from there you can get a rough estimate of the radius of the electron for instance. Okay, so with this, basically I will terminate the discussion on electrostatics. And in my next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss magnetostatics. Okay.